The Guardian's Call. Sarah Mitchell hadn't expected to find purpose again after leaving the Earth Defense Force. Yet here she was, Chief Medical Officer of Outpost Helios, the most remote human-operated medical station in the Orion Arm. The station's curved windows offered a view of swirling purple nebulae, a sight that still caught her breath even after 2 years of service. Her morning routine of checking inventory was interrupted by an unusual sound, a soft, melodic chiming that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sarah's military training kicked in immediately, her hand instinctively moving to the medical scanner at her hip. "HFY, run a full-spectrum analysis of that sound," she commanded the station's AI. Analysis complete, the AI responded after a moment. Sound patterns match known vocalizations of juvenile luminary, though I detect no registered luminary presence on the station. Sarah frowned. The luminary were a peaceful species of bioluminescent beings, their translucent bodies housing clusters of light that pulsed with their emotions. They rarely ventured this far from their home systems, and never without proper documentation. Following the sound led her to a maintenance shaft near the emergency supply storage. There, tucked behind a panel that should have been sealed, 3 small forms huddled together. Their bodies glowed with a dim, fearful blue, occasional pulses of darker colors rippling through them like waves in a troubled sea. Luminary cubs. Children. Their bodies were barely the size of Sarah's forearm, their light clusters still developing the complex patterns that would mark them as adults. They must have come aboard with the refugee ship that had docked briefly for supplies yesterday. "Hello, little ones," Sarah said softly, keeping her distance to avoid frightening them further. "I'm Sarah. I'm a doctor." She moved slowly, deliberately, trying to project calm and safety. The smallest cub's lights flickered with what might have been curiosity. Its chime was questioning, almost hopeful. "HFY. Access files on luminary physiology and run a preliminary health scan," Sarah whispered. As the AI complied, she noticed signs of stress and malnutrition in the cub's light patterns. They needed help, and soon. The station's emergency alert system shows that moment to blare to life. "Warning. Unidentified vessel approaching. Energy signatures match known Kraxan Hunter-class ships." Sarah's blood ran cold. The Kraxan were notorious throughout the sector, hunters who operated in the gray areas of galactic law, claiming to be retrieving refugees for their rightful owners. Their methods were brutal, their ethics non-existent. The largest cub let out a terrified chime, its lights dimming to nearly black. Sarah didn't need a translator to understand. The cubs were running from the Kraxan. "HFY. Seal all access to the medical bay," Sarah ordered, her voice hard with determination. "Initiate privacy protocols and delete all records of our current conversation. Dr. Mitchell, station policy requires. Override Mitchell 7 Alpha. Execute." As the security barriers hummed into place, Sarah turned back to the cubs. Their lights had shifted to a curious purple as they watched her, fear warring with desperate hope. "Listen carefully, little ones," she said, kneeling to their level. "I was a combat medic before I came here. Do you know what that means?" Their lights pulsed with confusion. "It means I know how to heal people, and I know how to fight to protect them. No one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go. Not while I'm breathing." The smallest cub floated forward cautiously, its lights brightening to a warm gold. Its tiny form brushed against Sarah's outstretched hand, sending a tingling sensation up her arm. The other 2 followed, their lights slowly shifting from fearful blues to cautious yellows and golds. "HFY. Begin recording. Personal log. Chief Medical Officer Sarah Mitchell. I am hereby invoking Emergency Medical Protocol 7, taking custody of 3 juvenile patients requiring immediate protective care. And may whatever gods are listening have mercy on anyone who tries to interfere with my treatment plan." As she began gathering supplies and fortifying the medical bay, Sarah couldn't help but smile grimly. The Kraxan were about to learn a lesson that countless others had learned before them. Never get between a human medic and their patients. The cubs watched her work, their lights now pulsing with curious patterns of gold and green. They didn't understand yet, but they would. Sometimes the fiercest guardians were the ones who had sworn to heal. Sarah checked her medical scanner, now reprogrammed for less than medical purposes. The Kraxen were in for a surprise if they thought this would be easy. After all, who better to take an enemy apart than someone who knew exactly how all the pieces fit together? Rest now, little ones, she murmured to the cubs as they huddled near her workstation. The real work begins soon. Lines in the stars. The Kraxen ship's first transmission came exactly as Sarah expected. Full of legal jargon and thinly veiled threats, she stood in the medical bay's secure communications room, watching their commander's scaled face on the view screen with what her old drill sergeant had called her combat medic smile. "This is Captain Vex Thor of the Kraxen recovery vessel Swift Justice," the reptilian figure announced. "We have registered claims on 3 luminary specimens that our sensors indicate are aboard your station, under Section 47 of the Frontier Accords." "This is Chief Medical Officer Sarah Mitchell," she cut him off, noting how his throat scales bristled at the interruption. "I have 3 juvenile patients under emergency medical protection. Any attempt to interfere with their treatment will be considered a hostile action against a neutral medical facility." The Kraxen captain's expression shifted to what might have been amusement. "Dr. Mitchell, surely you understand the legal ramifications of harboring fugitive property." "Property?" Sarah's voice could have frozen plasma. Behind her, the cub's lights pulsed with anxiety, but she kept her focus on the screen. "Funny thing about that, Captain. My medical scanners show 3 living, breathing children. But please, do continue explaining how you'd like to violate about 15 different medical protection treaties. I'm recording this for posterity." The station's administrator, a Centaurian named Excel, chose that moment to burst into the communications room, their crystalline form vibrating with distress. "Dr. Mitchell, the Kraxen are threatening military action." "Are they?" Sarah's smile grew sharper. "Area. Please inform our guests of the defensive capabilities of a Class 1 medical station." Analyzing, the AI responded. "Standard armaments include point defense systems for debris protection, shield generators rated for solar flares, and emergency containment fields. Additionally, the medical bay contains approximately 847 compounds that, if weaponized, could incapacitate 93% of known sentient species." The Kraxen captain's scales darkened. "You dare threaten?" "Threaten? Oh no, Captain. I'm simply providing relevant medical information. For instance, did you know that Kraxen respiratory systems are particularly sensitive to certain neural inhibitors? Fascinating stuff. I have 16 papers published on the subject." Zell moved closer, their crystalline voice dropping to a whisper. "Doctor, the station cannot withstand a direct assault. Perhaps if we negotiate." The smallest cub chirped fearfully, its lights dimming to a deep blue. Sarah reached back without looking, letting it wrap a tiny tendril around her finger. Its touch sent memories flooding back. Other children she'd sworn to protect, other lines she'd drawn in the sand. "Administrator," she said quietly, "I respect your position, but these cubs are my patients. The only negotiation will be how quickly the Kraxen leave. They have breaching pods, Cell warned, military-grade equipment." Sarah's laugh made both Cell and the Kraxen captain pause. "Military-grade? How interesting. I have 3 years of combat medical experience, 2 degrees in xenobiology, and enough stims in my system to restart a dying star. Would you like to compare qualifications, Captain?" She turned to fully face the screen, letting him see the steel in her eyes. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to back your ship off to a safe distance, or I'm going to demonstrate exactly why human medical professionals are required to take an oath to do no harm. Because, Captain," her smile disappeared, "that oath is the only thing holding me back." The cub's lights had shifted from fearful blue to something brighter, almost golden. They didn't understand her words, but they understood the tone. Here was someone who would fight for them. "You have 1 hour to comply," Sarah concluded. After that, I stopped being diplomatic. End transmission. The screen went dark, leaving Sarah alone with Cell and the Cubs. The administrator's crystalline form shimmered with conflicting emotions. "The station council will not approve of this." Noted. Sarah was already moving, her hands flying over medical control panels. Begin converting the quarantine fields to variable frequency. Let's see how Crack's onboarding armor handles a few thousand rads of targeted radiation. Dr. Mitchell, the AI seemed hesitant. That would violate several safety protocols. Yes, Sarah agreed, checking the seals on her medical supplies. Yes, it would. Add it to my tab. The Cubs watched her work, their lights now pulsing with curious patterns of gold and violet. The smallest one had taken to floating near her shoulder, occasionally making soft chiming sounds that her translator was beginning to recognize as something close to trust. "You can't win this," Cell said softly. Sarah paused in her work, looking at the three small beings who had placed their trust in her. "With all due respect, Administrator, winning isn't the point. Some lines have to be drawn. Some battles have to be fought, even if victory isn't certain." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Besides, they're the ones who picked a fight with a combat medic. Poor tactical decision, really." As if in response, the station's proximity alerts began to wail. The Kraxan had made their choice. Sarah squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. Time to show the galaxy why the most dangerous humans weren't the ones who were trained to kill, but the ones who had sworn to heal. She commanded, "Initiate medical protocol Mitchell Alpha. Let's give our guests a proper welcome." Breaking point. The first breach attempt came exactly where Sarah expected. The auxiliary medical storage unit, theoretically the weakest point in her defenses. She watched through the security feeds as the Kraxan boarding pod latched onto the station's hull like a metallic parasite. Status of defensive measures in Section C. "All preparations complete, Doctor. Though I should note that using quarantine fields as weapon delivery systems violates approximately." "Save the violation count for my court-martial," Sarah interrupted, checking her medical scanner's readouts. The Cubs huddled near her workstation, their lights pulsing between anxious indigo and determined gold. The smallest one, whom she'd started calling Echo for its habit of mimicking her movements, chimed questioningly. "Don't worry," she assured them. "This is going to get loud, but you're safe." The station shuddered as the boarding pod's cutting beams engaged. Sarah watched the temperature readings spike around the breach point and smiled. The Kraxan were about to learn some interesting lessons about human medical innovations. The first boarders burst through in sealed combat suits, weapons raised, and immediately stumbled as the modified quarantine field hit them. Sarah had spent hours calibrating it to affect their inner ear structure, making every step feel like walking on shifting gravity. "Fascinating case of vertigo you have there," she announced over the room's comm system. "Fortunately, I have just the treatment." She triggered the next sequence. The air filtration system, normally used to maintain sterile conditions, began pumping out a carefully calculated mixture of neural inhibitors. She'd designed it specifically for Kraxan physiology. Nothing lethal, but definitely unpleasant. The lead boarder managed 2 more steps before his legs gave out. What is this?" he growled, his translator struggling with his slurring speech. "Just a little cocktail I whipped up. Don't worry, the paralysis is temporary." Mostly. Sarah watched as 3 more Kraxan warriors collapsed. Consider it a professional demonstration of why you shouldn't annoy someone who knows exactly how your nervous system works. Through another security feed, she saw the second boarding pod positioning itself near the primary medical bay. Time for Phase 2. Initiate sterilization protocols in sectors 4 through 7. The AI's response held a note of what might have been admiration. "Deploying high-intensity UV radiation pulses. I feel compelled to note that this particular application of medical equipment is creative. The Kraxen's combat armor was designed to withstand conventional weapons. It wasn't, however, rated for the concentrated burst of radiation normally used to sterilize surgical equipment. The effect wasn't deadly. Sarah was still a doctor, after all. But it did play havoc with their suit systems. Warning, Araya announced. Station security indicates the Kraxen vessel is powering up main weapons. Sarah's expression hardened. They wouldn't dare fire on a medical station. The diplomatic. The station rocked with impact, cutting her off. Warning klaxons blared as emergency containment fields snapped into place. Direct hit to outer hull, Araya reported. Minor damage to sectors 8 and 9. Station integrity at 92%. The Cubs' lights flashed with terror, their small forms pressing closer to Sarah. Echo's chime was almost a whimper. Something in Sarah's chest tightened, then hardened into steel. So that's how they want to play it. She moved to the main control panel, her fingers flying over the controls. Araya, remember those modifications we made to the tissue regeneration arrays? The ones you specifically ordered me not to log in the official records? Yes, Doctor. Power them up. Full spectrum. The tissue regenerators, normally used to accelerate healing, had been carefully recalibrated. At full power, their energy signature would read identical to a prohibited weapons system, one that, technically, the station wasn't supposed to have. Broadcasting modified energy signature, Araya confirmed. Kraxen vessel is responding. They are powering down weapons and falling back to minimum safe distance. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. Amazing what happens when bullies think you're carrying a bigger stick. She turned to the Cubs, whose lights had begun to shift from fearful blues to curious greens. See, sometimes the best defense is convincing your enemy that attacking you would be incredibly stupid. A new alert flashed on her screen. An incoming transmission from the Kraxen ship. Captain Vexthor's scaled face appeared, rage evident in every feature. This is your final warning, Dr. Mitchell. You have committed acts of aggression against. No, Captain, Sarah cut him off, her voice arctic. You fired on a neutral medical facility. You attempted to breach quarantine protocols. You endangered my patients. Under Galactic Medical Convention Article 15, I am now authorized to use any and all means necessary to protect this station and those under my care. She leaned closer to the screen. Would you like me to demonstrate what any and all means looks like when applied by someone with extensive knowledge of Kraxen biology? The captain's scales flickered with what might have been uncertainty. You're bluffing. One human doctor. Tell me, Captain, did you know that Kraxen scale pigmentation is controlled by a very specific cluster of neurons? Fascinating research subject. I did my thesis on it. Would you like to see a practical demonstration of how to temporarily disrupt that control? I've got about 16 different compounds that could turn your entire crew a lovely shade of pink, permanently. Echo chose that moment to float into view of the transmission, its lights pulsing with what Sarah swore was defiance. The other Cubs followed, their combined glow casting shadows across her face. My patients are not property, Sarah said softly. They are children. And if you want them, Captain. Her smile could have cut diamond. You'll have to get through me first. Care to test your luck? The transmission cut off abruptly. Sarah watched as the Kraxen ship's engines flared, maintaining their distance but not retreating. They're regrouping, she muttered. Araya, begin recalibrating our defenses. Something tells me the next round won't be so easy. The Cub's lights swirled with determination, matching her own resolve. The line was drawn. Now they just had to hold it. The price of mercy. Word of Sarah's defiance spread through Outpost Helios like a quantum wave, impossible to contain and equally impossible to ignore. She could hear the debates raging through the station's comm channels as she continued fortifying the medical bay's defenses. Dr. Mitchell, Araya interrupted her work. Station Security Chief Rena is requesting entry. Sarah glanced at the Cubs, now sleeping in a makeshift nest of medical blankets, their lights pulsing softly with peaceful dreams. Security scan. Chief Rena is alone and unarmed. Let her in. The security doors hissed open to admit the tall Andarian, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the light. Rena had served with the Galactic peacekeepers before taking the security position at Helios, and Sarah had always respected her judgment. "Interesting day you're having," Rena observed, her faceted eyes taking in the modified medical equipment and defensive preparations. Had worse. Sarah continued calibrating a neural inhibitor, though usually not while dealing with this much paperwork. The stations divided. Rena moved closer, lowering her voice. "Half the crew thinks you're a hero. The other half thinks you're going to get us all killed. And what do you think?" Rena's crystalline form shifted colors, the Andarian equivalent of a thoughtful frown. "I think you're both. The Kraxan have called for reinforcements. 3 more ships will arrive within 6 hours. Sarah's hand stilled on her equipment. "The Cubs won't survive in Kraxan custody. You know what they do to retrieved property." "I know." Rena's voice held old pain. "I saw it during my peacekeeper days." "But Sarah, 4 Kraxan warships against 1 medical station." Echo stirred in the nest, its lights flickering with troubled dreams. Sarah moved to adjust its blanket, her touch gentle. The Cub's lights immediately calmed, shifting to peaceful gold. "Did I ever tell you why I left the Earth Defense Force?" Sarah asked quietly. "You never talk about it." "There was a colony on Proxima Beta. Small place, mostly researchers and their families. Pirates hit it while we were on patrol nearby." Sarah's voice was distant, lost in memory. "By the time we arrived, they'd already taken what they wanted, including the children. Our orders were to secure the colony and wait for reinforcements." Rena's exoskeleton dimmed with understanding. "But you didn't. I took our medical shuttle and went after them. Against orders, against regulations, against common sense. Found them 3 days later in an asteroid belt. Sarah's fists clenched. "They hadn't bothered to treat the children's injuries. Didn't see the point, since they were just property to be sold." "What did you do?" Sarah's smile was razor sharp. "I showed them exactly why the Geneva Convention had to add specific rules about medical officers in combat. Saved 16 kids that day. Lost my commission, but..." She looked at the sleeping Cubs. "Some prices are worth paying." The station shuddered as another warning shot from the Kraxan ship grazed their shields. The Cubs stirred but didn't wake. "The other ships will have better weapons," Rena warned. "Good thing I have better tricks." Sarah moved to her workstation, pulling up schematics. "Want to see something interesting?" Turns out medical stasis fields, when properly modified, make excellent shield amplifiers. Rena studied the calculations, her crystalline form shifting to surprised violet. This could actually work, temporarily, at least." She looked at Sarah. "But it won't hold forever." "It doesn't need to." Sarah's fingers flew over the controls. "I sent out a priority alert to the Galactic Medical Council 6 hours ago. Detailed everything. The Cubs, the Kraxan, all of it. They can't ignore a direct violation of medical neutrality. The Council moves slowly. Which is why I also sent the feed to every medical station and humanitarian organization in the sector." Sarah's grin was fierce. Amazing how quickly bureaucracy moves when public opinion is involved. Another impact rocked the station. This time, Echo did wake, its lights flashing fearful purple. Sarah moved instantly to comfort it, her hand gentle on its glowing form. "Shh, little one, you're safe." She looked up at Rena. "I won't let them take these children. Not now, not ever." Rena was silent for a long moment. Then her exoskeleton shifted to resolute blue. "Security override Rena Alpha 7. Area. Transfer all auxiliary power to medical bay defenses." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's against about 12 regulations. Probably more." Rena moved to the defense console. But I didn't join station security to watch children being sold as property. What do you need? Before Sarah could answer, Aria's voice cut in with new urgency. Warning. Multiple ships dropping out of FTL. Signatures mesh cracks and reinforcements. The cubs were all awake now, their lights pulsing with fear as they huddled together. Sarah stood between them and the viewport, her shadow falling across their glowing forms like a shield. Well then, she said softly, let's show them why picking a fight with a human medical officer was their second mistake. She glanced at the cubs. Their first was thinking I'd ever let them harm children. The station's alert system began to wail as the Kraxan fleet moved into attack position. Sarah Mitchell, former combat medic and current guardian of 3 terrified alien children, squared her shoulders and prepared for war. Some battles were worth any price. When stars shine brighter. The void outside Outpost Helios blazed with weapons fire as 4 Kraxan warships maneuvered into attack formation. Inside the medical bay, Sarah Mitchell watched their approach with the calm focus that had kept her alive through 3 combat tours. Multiple hull breaches detected in sectors 3 through 7, Aria reported. Emergency containment holding at 60%. Status of the modified stasis fields. Operating at maximum capacity. However, power reserves are dropping. Estimated 17 minutes until critical failure. Sarah nodded, her hand absently stroking Echo's glowing form as the cub pressed against her leg. The smallest luminary had refused to return to the nest, its lights pulsing between determined gold and fearful blue. Its siblings huddled nearby, their combined glow casting shifting shadows across the medical equipment. Dr. Mitchell. Rena called from the defense station. Incoming transmission. Multiple sources. The main screen flickered to life, splitting into several windows. Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the faces. Representatives from medical stations across the sector, humanitarian organizations, even a few military vessels that happened to be passing nearby. This is Dr. Chen from Arcturus Medical, one of them announced. We received your alert. The Galactic Medical Council is in emergency session, but we thought you might appreciate some unofficial support in the meantime. Unofficial support meaning the 3 heavy cruisers that just dropped out of FTL behind the Kraxan fleet. Another voice added dryly. Amazing how many ships were in the area for routine exercises. Sarah felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. The Kraxan won't back down easily. They hate losing face. Then perhaps they should not have attacked a medical station. The new voice belonged to Ambassador T. Lara of the Galactic Council, her hologram shimmering with barely contained fury. Captain Vexthor, your actions have forced an emergency session of the Council. Stand down immediately. The Kraxan captain's scaled face appeared on a separate screen, his expression twisted with rage. These are internal matters of property retrieval. The Council has no jurisdiction. Property. T. Lara's voice could have frozen suns. I am looking at the medical scans Dr. Mitchell transmitted. Those are children, Captain. Their neural patterns show clear signs of sentience, fear, and trauma. Or shall we discuss why your property shows evidence of having witnessed their parents' deaths? The cubs' lights flashed deep blue at the mention of their parents. Sarah moved closer to them, her presence a silent promise of protection. The Frontier Accords, Vexthor began, are hereby suspended pending review. T. Lara cut him off. Your ships are surrounded, Captain. The next shot you fire at that medical station will be considered an act of war against the Galactic Council itself. Sarah watched as the Kraxan ship's weapons powered down. Victory, but she knew better than to relax. And the cubs are hereby placed under the protection of the Galactic Medical Council, T. Lara declared. Dr. Mitchell, in recognition of your actions in defense of both medical neutrality and innocent lives, you are appointed their official guardian until suitable arrangements can be made with the luminary government. Echo's lights blazed sudden brilliant gold, its joy radiating like a miniature sun. Its siblings' lights joined in, creating a dazzling aurora of blues and golds that filled the medical bay. Thank you, Ambassador, Sarah said softly, though I suspect my paperwork is about to get much more complicated. A ripple of laughter ran through the assembled representatives. I believe we can handle the bureaucracy this time, Doctor, Lara said with a slight smile. You've done enough. As the Kraxan fleet retreated and relief ships began docking with the damaged station, Sarah finally allowed herself to sink into her chair. Echo immediately floated up to her shoulder, its light patterns shifting into what she now recognized as contentment. Doctor, ARI interrupted gently. I feel compelled to inform you that your actions have violated approximately 372 regulations. Only 372. Sarah reached up to gently touch Echo's glowing form. I must be losing my touch. However, the AI continued. I have noted that your methods, while unorthodox, resulted in 0 casualties while successfully protecting endangered patients. Perhaps some regulations require updating. Sarah laughed softly as all 3 cubs settled around her, their lights pulsing in harmony. Imagine that. The galaxy learning something from human stubbornness. Not stubbornness, Rena corrected, her crystalline form glowing with approval. Compassion. You showed them that true strength isn't about firepower or legal authority. It's about standing up for those who cannot stand for themselves. Through the medical bay's windows, Sarah could see ships from a dozen worlds moving to protect the station. Humanity wasn't alone in the galaxy anymore, but they had brought something unique to the stars. A fierce determination to protect, to heal, to fight for what was right. The Cubs' lights had shifted to peaceful gold, their small forms finally relaxing fully. They were safe. They were protected. And somewhere in the great bureaucracy of galactic civilization, laws were already being rewritten. Sometimes it took a human to show the galaxy how to be more humane. RIA, Sarah said quietly. Begin recording. Medical log, final entry. 3 patients stable and recovering. Treatment successful. She smiled as Echo chimed softly against her cheek. Prognosis, excellent. Above them, the stars seemed to shine just a little bit brighter.